for our next segment, we're going to be looking at some of the great gardeners of Instagram.
Are you following me? Are you following me, dude?
Now, this week for our Are You Following segment, we are following Amanda of the Ever Hopeful Gardener on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. She has been evolving as a gardener for the last 15 years. Her social media is a mix of humor and education, as she believes there is always something more to learn about gardening, but having fun is the most important. Where she once grew vegetables in her backyard, she has expanded into cut flowers, medicinal herbs, and all things compost. Amanda currently composts 4 different ways, including cold, hot, worm, and bokashi. Amanda is passionate about the benefits of composting, both for your garden and the environment. Soil health and soil science has become a particular passion. She moves towards not just organic, but regenerative gardening. All right, so we've got Amanda joining with us here today on our very first Let's Get Growing show. It is so great to have you with us, Amanda. Thanks again for joining with us today.
You are welcome. I'm glad to be here. I have to say, I really loved that intro with the guy yelling, "Are you following me?" That was really funny.
I know, yeah, exactly. That was actually one of the very first introductions I made, and I was just, I myself couldn't stop laughing for quite a while when I saw that video the first time. So I'm glad you really liked it, and again, I'm really glad that you've joined with us for our very first show. It's really awesome to have you here with us, and so right off the bat, I want to dig again, like I was saying to Mark. One of the big things that we do here in the Let's Get Growing show is to kind of talk about our garden stories. So I was just wondering a little bit about how you got started gardening.
Oh gosh, let's see if I can sum up it all in 30 seconds for you. I got started gardening because I was a new homeowner and a newlywed, but I didn't have a yard, so I did containers on my deck. I didn't watch shows or read books or really know what I was doing except to buy whatever they had at Lowe's or Home Depot. I didn't start things from seed. So that is my origin story. And over the last 15 years, like the bio said, I've completely evolved in terms of how I think about gardening and working with nature instead of trying to control it. And then joining Instagram, well, I had my personal account, but 3 years ago, like everybody else, I joined Instagram as a gardener during quarantine. And the last 3 years of being on Instagram in the gardening community have been the most expansive in my gardening timeline in terms of the amount I've learned and evolved and changed. And I'm so thankful to the gardening community on Instagram because people recommend books and scientists, and there is so much to learn. And I had no idea about any of it. I started composting because of Instagram. I started regenerative gardening because of Instagram, which kind of sounds weird because most of us think social media, but it does have its upside.
Yes, absolutely. And I've really enjoyed the same sort of thing when it's came to doing my channel and everything, and almost got a pretty similar story as I started with gardening just a little bit later on as well too. And gardening is just a really amazing hobby, or just a great thing to be doing when it comes to taking care of your home and all that sort of stuff, to be able to be a little bit more self-sustainable. Now, I wanted to ask you though, when it comes to gardening, what do you enjoy growing the most in your garden?
Tomatoes. I mean, such a cliche answer, but I do keep it, I keep it interesting with the tomatoes because I don't grow the same tomatoes every year. I always grow like 4 that I know I'm going to like and be happy with. And then I do like 9 or 10 brand new to me tomatoes. And usually there's a theme. So one year it was all like super weird looking tomatoes or unusual looking ones. And this upcoming year, it's going to be all different kinds of cherry tomatoes. And because I was influenced by Instagram, I saw someone post a giant bowl filled with like 12 different types of cherry tomatoes. It was the most gorgeous picture. And so that influenced my tomato gardening for this year. So tomatoes.
Absolutely. You know, tomatoes again, and it is kind of one of those things. Everybody loves growing tomatoes. I do as well, and I do it very similar to you too as well. I kind of have a theme each and every year. I have a back kind of fence line on the back part of the party property, and what we do is we put about 10 different varieties each year. And this last year, for my theme, we were growing dark tomatoes.
I love that.
Yeah, so we had like the Cherokee purples and the true black brandy wines. I even had this Ukrainian variety called Black from Tula. So those were just some really awesome ones. Plus, we had again bunch of other different varieties of tomatoes. But the one thing I found here in the area where I grow in Southern Oregon is we've been going through some of these like West Coast heat waves and all of that. And so one of my big issues this last year was production on my tomato plants because of the heat. So, you know, when it gets a little too hot, you know, up above 90, you know, into the 90s, especially 95 and above. I mean, we had a record number of 100-degree days this last year. And in between those 100-degree days, it wasn't getting much below 95 either. So that is just terror for tomato plants. And they just start dropping those flowers and fruits and everything. So my goal this next year and my theme is going to be heat tolerant tomato plants
Ooh. Are you going to
because
share? Are you going to share with everybody your results of like what you find to be really heat tolerant? Because I would like to take notes.
yes, absolutely. Because again, with not having so much production, and I really enjoy the tomatoes and all of that, I did have one or two varieties. One especially called Big Red Chief, and I grew this one actually in a large pot. It was probably, I'd say, almost a 10-gallon pot. And you know, when you're growing tomatoes in a container, you're not really expecting, you know, really big size tomatoes on some of those larger tomato varieties. But Big Red Chief really just kind of you know, just blew me away with its production and the size of tomatoes I was getting, even throughout all of that really hot, intense weather. You know, and they were right directly in the sun too. So we'll definitely be growing more of those. And I'll be also looking out for a bunch of other different types of heat tolerant tomatoes. But real quick, to answer that question though, for myself more so, is I like growing peppers. I think peppers is my big theme each and every year that I grow, and I love growing all sorts of varieties of peppers,
Hot and sweet.
hot and sweet. But actually, over the last few years, I've moved more away from the hotter ones. I mean, I like growing them because there's just so many interesting pods, and so you know, and especially the hot ones grow those, you know, grow into these really really cool looking pods, and I just consume more of the sweeter peppers,
Yeah.
you know. So, you know, it just makes a lot more sense, you know, to grow what you eat for the most part, but at the same time, you know, you got to experiment and have some fun with things too.
Can I ask if you have a favorite hot pepper?
Favorite hot pepper that I've grown, I'd have to say it was probably this last year. Now, mind you, I'm not eating very many of them. If I make and grow a hot pepper, I'm probably going to be making like a powder or something out of it,
Mhm.
maybe to kind of like, you know, if I'm going to add it to food, I can kind of take it down a notch when it comes to the heat. But Prima Tolli was the was told to me to be the hottest pepper that anybody's ever eaten. And so I grew this pepper out, and I actually had a friend who, right at the beginning of the season, volunteered himself to eat this pepper. And we actually did a live stream a few months back with him eating and trying out the Prima Tolli pepper. And I'll tell you, he did regret that.
That sounds terrible. No, thank
It
you.
was terrible. It was terrible. But again, you know, I grow the pepper plants because there's just such a wide array of variety
Mhm.
of them all. The plants all grow in different ways. They all have each their own little bit of temperament that they have that you got to kind of learn a little bit, and especially when it comes to growing some of those hotter varieties. Really interesting pods, but again, I really enjoy the sweeter peppers, you know. Bells, there's one called Ajvarsky that I really liked this last year. Ajvarsky was really cool. So yeah, those sort of things I love and grow each and every year because I love them so much. Now, I guess the opposite of that question is there anything in the garden that you least like growing or is more difficult anyways?
Some of the brassicas hate me. I cannot grow a Brussels sprout or a cauliflower to save my life. I can do kale, I can do broccoli, I cannot do cabbage, Brussels sprouts, or cauliflower. And I've probably been trying to grow them for the last 7 years. And last summer was the first year I was like, I'm done. I give up.
You know what? I mean, I guess we garden really a lot alike because that seems to be one of my issues too. Brassicas. Oh, I don't know what it is. I try each and every year. I get some successes with some of them. Brussels sprouts, actually, the story behind that one for me is I've tried a couple of years in a row to grow Brussels sprouts, and I gave up probably the third year of trying, but I just let the plants stay in there. And I
Yeah.
was completely surprised without doing anything or messing around with them at all. When it came around to that winter time, they really just took off, and I ended up getting a bunch of Brussels sprouts off of them. So it was my only success was really just kind of forgetting about them. Like, forget it, I'm done with you. And then that's when they were like, okay, well, if you're done with me, well, then I'm gonna show you what I'm all about. Sorry, you talked about there in your bio about composting. So you've been really digging into composting, right? So tell us a little bit about the benefits of the different types of composting that you've been doing.
I am certifiably obsessed with compost. It is the best thing you can do for your garden. It is made from things you were going to throw away from inside and outside of your house. It ties in with all of what we're learning about these days with soil science. I mean, it's only been like the last 40 years that scientists have understood why there is all the things that there are in healthy soil and what different roles they play. And adding compost to your soil is going to add all that microbiology, all the bacteria, the fungi, the microarthropods, the earthworms, the nematodes. There are good nematodes, they're not all bad. It's going to add that to your soil. And what that's going to do is it's going to actually let you be more of a lazy gardener, because if there's that life in the soil, the plants are able to control their nutrition and get fed what they want when they want it in the right amount and the right form. So you don't have to fertilize. I mean, I don't fertilize my garden. I just top dress with compost, or I do a soil drench of compost tea. And I don't have to pay for the compost because I'm making it myself. And there's so many different ways you can do it, that there is a way for every person, no matter how much energy or space you have, to compost. And the benefits are just, I can't even describe it.
It truly is the best way. And I've been digging more into compost myself these last few seasons and all of that. And like you said, really, most any space you can find a way to start breaking down some of that stuff that you've got going on in your garden, or you're trying to get rid of as garden waste and all of that too. So you also have some worm bins.
I do. I have one worm bin. I would love to have like 10 worm bins, or to create like a giant worm farm. I got to like baby steps. I've got so much like that I want to do. I have to like say, okay, what do I want to do most? And right now, one worm bin is working just fine. We're going to leave it there. But a worm bin is such an easy, non-smelly, non-messy, inexpensive way, because you don't have to buy a worm bin. You can make your own for like $6.98. You got to buy the worms, but the bin can cost you $6.98. So it's inexpensive. It's easy. Kids love it. Oh, hey, hey, Johnny, go feed the worms. Okay. So there's no downside. And worm castings are even more beneficial, believe it or not, than compost.
Yes, yes. And again, my big goal this year is to get my worm bin going. Again, I also purchased a very inexpensive container and all of that. So I've got ideas when it comes to setting up and doing a worm bin this year, as well as some of the other composting and everything. So, last question for you here, too, as we have you here for our Instagram segment. What was it that made you decide to go out and start sharing all of your gardening on Instagram?
I was lonely. It was during quarantine. Everybody was stuck at home. And my husband and I decided, we've got nothing to do. Let's build a garden shed. And then I'm like, well, maybe, not everybody's going to want to hear on my regular Instagram about the garden shed. So I'll just create my own account. And so it just started with building the garden shed. And then I started meeting all these other gardeners, and it was such a great community, and I was learning. And so I started posting all my gardening stuff. And it'll be 3 years in May, and I could never have imagined what it would turn into when I started it 3 years ago. It has been so awesome because social media has its downsides for sure. But the gardening community especially is so good.
Yes, absolutely. And again, similar, I got on and started doing all of my gardening and sharing with people online. And it was really one of the best things I ever did in getting to join in with the gardening community. Like you were saying about social media, so much, just wrong with certain things that are out there. And when I got into gardening and decided to start sharing, I wiped out anything that wasn't gardening in my social media. So every time I go on anything, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, or anything like that, all I see on my timeline is gardeners, gardening projects, people sharing gardening and all that sort of stuff. And it really is wonderful. It really is the best community out there is the gardening community. And
Yep.
yeah, and then after doing all of that, you ended up right here on our show, Let's Get Growing. And it's been such a pleasure to have you with us here today, this week, for our very first show. So again, thank you so much for joining with us here and sharing all of your gardening stories with us.
You are welcome. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Amanda.